Welcome to the channel. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. So here we are today, guys. I'm going to be giving you a comparison between the two new releases from Specht Sohne and the Pagani design. When I unboxed this, I managed to see that Pagani design also released their version of a new release from a very popular and luxurious brand. So Specht Sohne came first, done the full review. I'm really happy with the watch, was quite impressed with the overall quality. Now the Pagani design arrived a couple of days ago. Sat down, gave it a full once over, tried to find all the differences and similarities that I could, and hopefully give you guys a pretty good comparison so you can see which one is it that you like. So let's go ahead and compare the Specht Sohne versus the Pagani design. So let's start off on specifications first and remind you about the Specht Sohne. So it's 50 meters of water resistance with a screw down crown and a screw down case back. You've got a sapphire crystal, and the watch uses the Miyota 8215 automatic movement with a beat rate of 21,600 vibrations per hour. Now, in comparison to the Pagani design, everything is exactly the same aside from it having 100 meters of water resistance, which, to be fair with you, on AliExpress, 50 meters to 100 meters, I don't think any of them are proven. They're both alleged, but that is the difference on paper. Now, the first main difference we're going to see is, of course, dimensions. You can see that clearly on screen. So the Specht Sohne, they state is 37 millimeters, but on calipers it is closer to 36 millimeters, with a thickness of 11 millimeters, a lug to lug of 45 millimeters, but just slightly extends due to those end links on the integrated or the faux integrated bracelet. It comes to about 47.5. But the clasp does taper down to 16 mil. Now the Pagani design clearly looks bigger, but how much bigger? So this is a 40 millimeter case diameter. Still, they've managed to get a thickness of 11 millimeters, which is quite good, to be honest. I thought it would be a bit thicker. The lug, however, is 50 millimeters, so significantly bigger than the one on the 36. Now the bracelet only tapers down to around 20 millimeters. Now the next difference we're going to see is the weight. To some people it does matter, and when I picked up the Pagani design, you can clearly tell it's a lot heavier. So in comparison, the Specht Sohne is only 126 grams. The Pagani design comes in a whopping 160 grams, which is like dive watch territory. Now some other differences include on the Specht Sohne, you have a total of 5 different colors, including a bi-steel variant. And then with the PD, you get 4 different colors. Now the price, the main thing, the Specht Sohne is just under £100, so it's about £97. When I did buy it prior to these sales, I think it was around 106 or something, if I'm not mistaken. Pagani design currently is at £82.79 to be exact. That's the price I saw at the time of this video. So yeah, it already is slightly cheaper. Okay, now we can start looking at the dial and look at the smaller differences that you have. And these dials, while they look similar, there's a lot more differences than you might see. So the first thing is the color. The PD has a little bit more teal in there, is slightly leaning towards the greener side of things. And you also have a sunray pattern, which you can kind of see on camera. Now the Specht Sohne is actually a flat color, so there is no reflection or sunray on there, and it's slightly bluer, so it's got a bit more of an icy look in comparison to the PD. You can see the difference here. Now another slight difference, Arabics on the Pagani are slightly thinner. So if you take a look at the 12, 6, 9, they're not as thick or as large as they are on the SNS. Now these are all subjective differences. I'm not saying which one is better or which one is worse. It's just clearly what the difference that I see here. Now the framing and polishing around the batons and Arabics, all exactly the same. The hands are also more or less exactly the same, as well as the date mag windows. I think if anything, the PDs is just slightly clear, or it could be a slightly larger date window, to be fair, whereas this one is maybe a bit smaller. Now the other difference is, of course, on the handset. While the main hour and minute are the same, the seconds hand is quite different between the two. PD have gone for the blued seconds hand, which appears on this colorway if I'm not mistaken, but the counterweight is just flat. There's no skeletonization, as is on the SNS, and that little feature with the hollowed out counterweight, I really like that, and it ties in really well with the watch that they are homaging. Now we've got a couple of bigger differences. One of them is, of course, the chapter ring on the PD, and it does a good job of filling out the rehaut area, crisply printed, and it looks perfectly aligned as well. Now the SNS went with a printed minute track, equally as good. Again, nothing is better here between the two. Preference wise, I don't mind either. Now one final visual difference is, of course, the design on the dial. Now I didn't expect this from the PD. I did assume it would have that honeycomb pattern, I think that is what the pattern is on the watch they're homaging to. So SNS did a great job of this honeycomb pattern, six-sided, and then you've got some detailing in between those. Looks like some deep lines. In terms of depth, visibility, engraving, the quality, superb from SNS. You can't knock them. And they've also got that protruding sort of plinth where you've got the logos. Now with the PD, you've got a series of alternating parallelograms, which with that sunburst do look good. Now in terms of definition, I'd say it's on par with the SNS. You can clearly see it, all the lines, no inconsistencies, very detailed. You also got that applied polished logo. So very interesting shape, but if you're looking for the honeycomb, you're going to get that on the SNS, whereas this obviously, as I said, has a slightly different shape. But not only that, you can see sort of columns on the dial as well, which is important to notice. And that is it for like the main differences that stand out on both watches. Now, comparing the lume, the first Pagani design I've seen with very decent lume. Now, I'd say the Pagani design in this lume comparison just marginally edges it over the SNS. Now, it could be because they use BGW9, it's a little bit brighter, but if you look at that handset, definitely Pagani design is just a little bit brighter than the SNS. So I'd give the win here to PD, again by a very small amount. That's the visual differences on the dials that I noticed. Now we can move over to the case, and in terms of finishing on the A face, so you get this linear coarse brushing. It's more or less exactly the same on the SNS as it is on the Pagani. I'm not going to get a microscope out and start measuring grain and sizes, but yeah, it looks pretty much more or less exactly the same. Now, obviously, you've got more surface area on the PD, so the brushing in some instances may look just a little sharper because just you can see a lot more of it. But just talk about the actual physical difference between the cases. Again, there's a fair few. First one, crown size, which is an obvious one given the sizes are different. So on the SNS, the crown is 5.8 and the Pagani design is 6.3. Not much of a difference, but it is at least proportionate. The next thing we're going to look at is when we put the cases at this angle, we're going to look at the end links. So the PD, I'd say, is a true integrated bracelet watch because you've got a large bar that goes through that and holds these two polished center links to that angled or beveled case. Now with the SNS, these are actually end links, so I call it a full integrated bracelet because there's spring bars on the back which can be removed. Now that comes with a few things. So the fact that the spring bars are attached there, you are going to have some very slight inconsistencies in how those end links fit because the nature of small spring bars. So sometimes they'll fit a bit better, sometimes they won't fit as good. What you also get is you get a break in that line of the case. Some people are particular. To me, it's barely noticeable and that's not something I mind. But you'll see that line on the end link is just slightly off to the line in the case. So you are going to have inconsistencies there. However, that does mean around here, it's a lot smoother to touch and you do get that bit of polishing that breaks up the brushing. Now with regards to the PD, pretty much opposite to what I said about the SNS. You've got a cleaner line on the case. You can just see how that line is continuously across. There's no breaking it from the end links and those polished center links fit in there. So you'll have a cleaner look on the watch. However, because the links go in, you see these edges on the inside, nobody really refines them. So that means you do have this nasty bit of sharpness across the top. Right now, I don't know what you like wearing watches. When I wear watches, I do like to touch them now and then. So if your hand goes over the top, you will definitely feel that edginess on those polished center links. Now, another bonus here is you get a lot more articulation from the PD. You can see how that second link, or let's say the first link should be after the case, goes all the way underneath the case. In comparison to the SNS, it does articulate enough, but I think that case back there is preventing it from going as much as the PD. A small feature, but a difference nonetheless. Now, another difference with the PD is you get drill lugs, which, yes, they're good, but they're probably useless at this point because you're not going to change that bracelet out. And on the case back, when we compare the two, the PD has more of an OEM or a branded case back. So people who are branded driven like to see that. You're definitely going to prefer this because it looks pretty good, pretty OEM. It's got your specifications, that nice bit of circular brushing, and yeah, it just looks, like it's made by somebody, whereas the SNS, it's got that plain, no branded sort of case back. Now there is another slight difference on the case, and that is down to the finishing. So if we put the case head on, with the PD, you only really notice that linear brushing, but you don't notice that bit of polishing that extends over to the case. So that polished bevel, I think, is quite important on this case because it does make the case quite blingy. It makes it stand out and is a nice feature. But on the PD, because of the bigger case, those slithers are barely visible at that particular angle. Now with the Specht Sohne, you can see that those polished bevels do come out just slightly, and I'm talking, microns difference. There's not a major difference, but that polishing just extends over to the case just that little bit. So at this angle, you can definitely see that the case does have polished bevels, whereas with the PD, because they're so slim, you don't see them. Now those are the differences on the case. Now let's move on to the bracelet, which has again a few more differences, even though they look more or less exactly the same. Now the differences here are in the finishing and the refinement more than anything, because functionally they're the same. They both use spring bars, they both use butterfly clasps. The differences I noticed here, and I've taken some close-up pictures, is on the consistency of the beveling, because both bracelets do have links that are beveled on either side. And as I've picked this Pagani up, I've picked it up on the right side, so you can see that bevel on the third link is slightly off. You see how the angle doesn't match up. I've also noticed a bit of pitting towards the bottom side of the links, so on the brush surfaces, and it could be damage or it could be actual pitting into the steel. It's difficult to say, but it was present on both sides of that bracelet. Now also on the links, at a certain angle, when you look at them straight on, the beveling isn't the same on both actually, so they do have some minor inconsistencies. You also got some poor edging on the PD, so one of the links there that I'm looking at right now, that brushing transition isn't fully crisp, and there's also another one where they've kind of missed it towards the end, which is by the clasp. And to be absolutely honest, you're not going to see these small differences. You're not going to look at the watch that close ever. You're only going to notice them if you're comparing side by side, or you've got your bracelet laid flat and you actually start looking at the bevels. It's something which is unnoticeable to the naked eye, again, unless you really look for it. But the SNS, what I've noticed, is far more consistent on the brushing. The bevels, while as there are very slight differences between the angles on both sides of those links, but it's far more consistent visually than it is on the Pagani design. It's a cleaner finish, and again, just a touch more refinement. And having said that, that brings this comparison to a close. Those are all the differences I've spotted, and you'll notice no one difference is probably that big, except I'd say maybe around the dial area, right? Different dial design, chapter ring, etc. So that's probably got the most differences. In terms of the case and bracelet, there's not a lot. Now this is where the personal opinion comes in. So I personally do prefer the SNS, and I think the main driver behind that is wrist fit, right? Because I've got a 6.5 inch wrist. That 47.5 lug to lug really fits nicely on my wrist. It's dead center, and also due to the design of the case, the brushing, the polishing, the fluted bezel, it's an uprated sporty watch, and for me that looks better. It definitely fits a lot better. Now if you've got a wrist size of 7 inches and above and you feel a type of way about smaller watches, then yeah, you would have to go for the Pagani design. But the problem with the PD here is it's that 50mm lug to lug on a very straight case. So when on wrist, if your wrist is at a certain angle like this, it's like the watch is wedged upwards, because that flat case combined with the super articulating links, the case doesn't find a place to sit right. So you need to have the surface area on the wrist. So if you've got, as I said, 6.5 inches my wrist, if you've got a 7+ wrist size, then go for the 40. And if you've got like a 7.5 inch wrist, then definitely go for the 40mm if you don't like the smaller watches. Some people don't mind them. Some people with big wrists like smaller watches. But yeah, for me, the overall fit is better on the SNS, and that's particularly to my sort of my wrist. In terms of specs, exactly the same. Price, not much in the prices there with the coupons especially, so they're both going to be around the same price. Again, it's on your size preference, and I'd say from what I've seen here, the SNS is just slightly more refined. Not by much, just slightly, but the loom on the PD is again a bit better than it is on the SNS. So not much between them, to be honest. but there still is a lot of differences. So that's it from me today. Hope you enjoyed that comparison. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section, which one you guys prefer. I'll leave links in the description for both. And as always, I'll see you on the next video.